Hearken, you sons of iron and ashes, you who call yourselves lords of ruin and retribution. Know now the origin of Honsou, Warsmith of the Iron Warriors, breaker of bastions, for his tale is a wound upon the galaxy's bleeding skin, a story born not of honor, but of bitterness, betrayal, and ironclad will. In the tortured heart of the Eye of Terror, on the ruined forge worlds where the Iron Warriors huddled like wolves gnawing their own bones, a child was made, not born. His father was not a living man, but a memory, Honorable Sulaka, an apothecary slain in the cataclysm of the Horus heresy. His blood had long since cooled, but his legacy remained, entombed within a sliver of corrupted gene seed, salvaged from battlefields soaked in despair. Yet it was not Sulaka's blood alone that seeded the child. No, the foul hand of Fabius Bile, the Emperor's fallen flesh-crafter, had meddled with what should never have been touched. Where pure Iron Warrior's essence once rested, Bile had sown the taint of the Imperial Fists, their most hated enemies. A gene forging, profane and profane again, combining the genetic codes of brother and nemesis in a single embryo. Thus was Honsou conceived, a half-breed, a hybrid, a blasphemy walking. To the Iron Warriors, whose pride lay in blood unbroken since Perturabo's first wars, this was sacrilege. They named him Mongrel, spawn of shame, the half-breed. None would call him brother. None would grant him the honor of their brotherhood's grim songs. He grew not among equals, but among jailers. From the moment his eyes opened to the rust-choked skies of Medringard, Honsou knew he was alone. In the nightmare training pits of Kalan Gol, where would-be warriors fought for a scrap of respect, the other aspirants marked him as prey. Blows rained upon him more savagely than upon others. Weapons were accidentally sharpened. Training exercises designed to test endurance became tortures meant to break him. But Honsou did not break. With every broken rib, he grew harder. With every blade across his flesh, he grew swifter. And when he bled, he did not curse his blood for its corruption. He cursed the world for its blindness. If the sons of Perturabo would not call him brother, he would make them kneel to him as master. In those brutal years, Honsou learned the first and greatest lesson of his life, that blood alone does not grant power. Iron alone does not forge a man. Only unyielding will, sharpened to a killing edge, could carve a place in this brutal galaxy. And so, in secret and silence, Honsou honed himself into a blade the galaxy would one day fear. Among the Warsmiths of old, tales are told of the great sieges, of the defense of Terra, the fall of Olympia, the grinding wars against the Imperial Fists. Those glories belonged to others. Honsou knew he would never be counted among the ancient sons of Perturabo, honored with banners in the halls of Medringard. His only inheritance was contempt. But contempt is a poor weapon if not sharpened. Where his pure kin relied upon old glories, Honsou studied newer arts, sabotage, infiltration, psychological warfare. While others honed their axes, he honed his mind. He devoured forbidden texts on siegecraft and demonic binding. He studied not only how to tear down fortresses, but how to tear down legacies, to salt the very earth where an enemy once stood. It is said that in the darkness of the barracks, when the others slept or whispered curses at the mongrel, Honsou would kneel beside a rusted Iron Warrior standard, its colors faded with shame, and swear oaths, not to the Primarch, not to the Legion, but to himself. "I will forge a new Iron Warriors," he whispered to the cold stone, "stronger than weakness, purer than blood." The seed of ambition sprouted alongside hatred. And yet, what hope could one outcast truly hold in the heart of Medringard, where Warsmiths ruled by strength and the weak perished unseen? Fate, it seemed, had plans for Honsou. Across the Eye of Terror, murmurs began to stir. The Long War, that endless vendetta against the Imperium, was entering a new phase. The Despoiler, Abaddon the War Master, was preparing his next great crusade. Warsmith Barban Falk, master of Kalangol, was among those called to muster for war. Falk, proud and cruel, needed champions to lead his companies. He summoned the sons of Medringard's pits to prove their worth. Among them was Honsou, lean, scarred, burning with silent fury. The trial was brutal beyond measure. Arena battles where blood soaked the iron sands, tests of endurance against demonic storms, trials of nerve as bound demons clawed at the aspirants' minds, whispering promises of power and betrayals uncounted. Aspirants fell by the dozens. Strong men were broken. Proud warriors fled shrieking into the blackness beyond the fortress walls. But Honsou endured. Every slight he had suffered became a weapon. Every scar a badge of honor. Where others screamed, he smiled. Where others wept, he laughed. When it ended, only 3 champions remained standing. Forex the Relentless, Kruger the Warmaker, and Honsou the Half-Breed. Falk, ever the pragmatist, saw use in Honsou's tenacity. Blood was less important than victory. Falk named the trio his champions, each entrusted with a cohort of iron warriors. Thus, from the pits of scorn, Honsou rose to a rank his betters had sworn he would never touch. Yet even then, in the dark recesses of Kalangol's citadel, voices whispered, "He is impure. He is unclean. His blood is wrong." Honsou heard every whisper. He carved them into his mind like epitaphs for those who would one day kneel before him or die under his heel. And so the half-breed was armed, armored, and unleashed upon the galaxy. Hydra Caudatus awaited, a fortress world untouched for millennia, bulwarked against siege and decay. Honsou would march to war beside Falk's armies, not as a slave or an outcast, but as a champion. Yet he knew this was not enough. It was never enough to serve. Honsou's heart was a furnace stoked not by loyalty, but by a singular dream. One day they will no longer whisper. One day they will only scream. Thus began the bloody ascent of the half-breed, the Iron Lord yet to come. Steel screamed and the stars wept, blood as the Iron Warriors descended upon Hydra Caudatus. It was the opening move of a campaign not for conquest, not for glory, but for vengeance measured in centuries. The Imperium had fortified Hydra Caudatus as a bastion against heresy. A forged world, a weapons manufactory, a symbol of resilience. But no fortress, no matter how ancient, could stand forever against the architects of its undoing. From the storm-racked skies came the Iron Warriors, clad in battered ceramite daubed in gray and gold. Their dropships scoured the heavens with fire, punching through void shields with brute force. Leading them, beneath the blackened banners of Kalangol, marched Warsmith Barban Falk, and among his chosen champions, newly blooded, strode Honsou. The half-breed bore no rank beyond champion then. Yet already, the pitiless eye of destiny marked him. Tor Christo, the citadel at the heart of Hydra Caudatus, was no mere fortress. It was a bastion designed by the Imperium's finest architects, garrisoned by Skitarii legions, and defended by ancient Titan engines of the Legio Invicta. Its adamantium walls had never been breached. Its planetary defense array could shatter entire fleets before they even reached orbit. But the Iron Warriors were not daunted. Siegecraft was their inheritance, older and deeper than any stone the Imperium could lay. They were not an army. They were the storm and the shattering. Honsou's role was clear. He would lead the vanguard. From the first hours of the siege, he proved himself not merely brutal, but brilliant. Under blackened banners, his warband tore open the outer defenses with methodical cruelty. They tunneled beneath walls, planted melter charges at foundations, and drove cybernetic war beasts ahead to test every weakness. Where defenders regrouped, Honsou sent false retreats to lure them into killing grounds. Where the walls looked unbreakable, he turned the very ground beneath them into a weapon. Blood slicked the stone valleys as Skitarii phalanxes collapsed under barrages of macro-cannon fire. Honsou personally led breach teams into the exposed guts of the manufactorums, flaying their defenders in labyrinthine corridors. He moved like a machine himself, relentless, tireless, unstoppable, his hammer and chain blade red with the blood of Mechanicus and mortal alike. Still, Tor Christo endured. For weeks the siege ground on, and the Iron Warriors fed men and machines alike into the grinding maw. Entire cohorts perished in the tunnels beneath the fortress. Sappers dug trenches so deep they were buried by their own collapse. Titans stalked the killing fields, bringing death with every stride. Even Falk, savage and demonic, began to rage at the Citadel's stubbornness. He demanded a decisive blow. He demanded blood enough to breach not just walls, but the very spirit of Hydra Caudatus. And Honsou delivered. Under cover of an all-out assault by Falk's heavy artillery, Honsou's warband detonated a chain of subterranean charges beneath Tor Christo's southern bastion. The resulting explosion shook the heavens, toppling bastions thought indestructible. Honsou himself led the first assault into the breach, clad in bloodied plate, roaring the ancient Iron Warriors' war cry into the smoke. Beyond the walls, defenders fell back to desperate last lines of defense. Inner courtyards, command bastions, and the sanctified halls where the Adeptus Mechanicus had hidden their most sacred relics. Honsou cared for none of it. He wanted only one prize. Beneath Tor Christo lay vaults sealed by the Mechanicus, vaults that held the untainted gene seed of the Imperial Fists. It was this treasure Falk sought, to replenish the Iron Warriors' corrupted bloodlines. Honsou's assault teams fought street by street, floor by floor, into the belly of the fortress. Every step was paid for in blood. His champions fell one after another. The sergeants and lieutenants he had fought beside since the pits of Kalingol, cut down by plasma fire and mass reactive rounds. Still, he advanced, dragging the remnants of his company forward. In the deepest sanctum of the vault complex, they met the last stand of the defenders. Castellan Vauban, master of Hydra Caudatus, clad in ornate Terminator plate. Vauban fought like a living god, his relic power sword carving bloody arcs through Honsou's warriors. Honsou met him head-on. The duel was savage beyond reckoning. Vauban's blade sheared through Honsou's right arm at the elbow, sending his chain blade clattering into the dust. Blood fountained from the stump, but Honsou did not fall. With a guttural roar, he surged forward, driving a combat knife through the weakened armor at Vauban's throat. The Castellane staggered, gurgled a defiant curse, and died at the half-breed's feet. Honsou stood over the body, wounded but unbowed. Around him, the last of the defenders were crushed. Tor Christo fell that day, not to the might of the Legio Invicta, not to the brilliance of the Mechanicus, but to the iron will of the half-breed. The vaults were breached, the prize was seized, and though Falk took the glory before the hosts of Abaddon, those who walked the blood-slick halls knew the truth. It was Honsou's hand that had shattered Hydra Caudatus. In the aftermath, even as the world burned and the fortress's ruins wept flame, Falk summoned his champions. He named Honsou first among them, praising his ruthlessness, his cunning, his indomitable fury. But for Honsou, praise meant nothing. In the blackness of his private thoughts, he savored only one thing. Blood had been spilled in his name, and the galaxy would bleed more yet. His missing arm would be replaced, improved. His broken body would be remade, stronger. His scars would not be shameful. They would be sigils carved by his own hand upon the stone of history. Hydra Caudatus was not an end. It was a beginning. A world had fallen. The Imperium would follow. And one day, soon, the whisper of his name would echo louder than any Primarch's decree. Honsou, Warsmith, half-breed no more, only iron, only vengeance. Thus was Hydra Caudatus broken. Thus was the future forged in fire and hate. The fires of Hydra Caudatus had barely guttered when the true war began. Not the siege of a fortress, but the siege for power itself. Victory in the material world was a simple thing compared to what came after. The ruthless dance of ambition, betrayal, and blood among the sons of Perturabo. Within the smoking ruins of the fortress world, in a war council dark with incense and demon smoke, the Iron Warriors gathered. Their armor bore the scars of hard-fought triumph, cracked plate, blackened helms, blades still wet with Mechanicus oil and blood. They had bled for Falk's glory, for the Iron Warriors' pride, or so it was said. In truth, each captain had bled for themselves. Barbin Falk, the Warsmith of Caelan Gol, stood at the center of the conclave, his presence a raw wound of hate and power. Warp light flared in his eyes, for victory at Hydra Caudatus had not merely fed his ego, it had elevated him. Across the Eye of Terror, the gods of chaos had watched the siege unfold with hungry fascination. And in Falk's bloody triumph, they found favor. Even now, the mark of ascension boiled across his flesh. His armored gauntlets hissed and cracked as he flexed them. His voice had grown deeper, distorted, touched by powers beyond mortal ken. He was becoming something more, something terrible. Honsou watched from the shadows of the gathering, his new augmetic arm still stiff from surgery, his wounds half-healed, but his spirit sharp as ever. He understood what few others did. Hydra Caudatus had not been the end of Falk's ambition, nor the Iron Warrior's salvation. It was a stepping stone. Falk sought demonhood, godhood, and the gods were answering. Falk's voice rose, booming across the assembly like a thunderclap. Hear me, sons of Perturabo. The fortress falls. The Imperium weeps. By this victory, I claim the mantle of the greatest warsmith since our father himself. Some cheered. Others bowed in silence, masks hiding contempt. Falk lifted high the spoils of Hydra Caudatus, the recovered gene seed, the sacred vaults cracked open by Honsou's hand, and offered them up before an altar, fashioned from the shattered sigils of the Imperial fists. The rituals began. Honsou felt the warp boil around them as the summoning commenced. The rites were older than memory, predating even the fall of Horus. Blood was spilled. Ancient Iron Warriors' banners were torn and burned, their smoke curling into forms that whispered and screamed. Falk bellowed oaths to the dark gods, oaths that promised eternal war, endless pain, unyielding strength. The chamber shook, the air crackled, and then Barbin Falk began to ascend. His body stretched and twisted, ceramite cracking and sloughing away as horns and spines erupted from flesh. His warplate became a second skin, molten and seething. Warp lightning arced from his outstretched hands. His roar split the very firmament of the fortress as his soul was torn free from mortal shackles. The Iron Warriors fell to one knee, not in loyalty, but in terror. Honsou knelt with them, but behind his bowed head, a smile crept across his lips. In Falk's apotheosis, opportunity had come. For in the moment of ascension, Falk's mortal concerns, his titles, his strongholds, his warriors, were rendered meaningless. He was no longer Warsmith. He was something else, something removed from the petty politics of the living. A void yawned in the chain of command, and where there is a void among the Iron Warriors, there is blood. Falk's remaining captains, Foryx, Kroger, and Honsou, turned upon one another even before Falk's ascended form had vanished into the warp. Their swords were drawn not against the Imperium, but against each other. Foryx, the most senior, called himself Falk's true heir. He commanded ancient loyalties and bore scars from 10,000 wars. Kroger, brutal and hot-headed, snarled that might alone should decide succession. Honsou said nothing. He let them shout and posture. He watched, he waited, and then he struck. Foryx died first. In the dead of night, in the ruined courtyard of Hydra Cordatus, he was ambushed by Honsou's warband. Outnumbered and caught unprepared, Foryx fought like a lion, slaying half a dozen attackers before Honsou himself moved in for the kill. Their duel was brutal, silent, save for the clash of iron and the hiss of blood on stone. Foryx's blade clanged from Honsou's augmetic limb, and that was his last mistake. Honsou's artificial hand clamped down on the blade's edge, wrenching it aside. His chain blade ripped through Foryx's gorget, spraying gore across the blackened stone. The old captain fell, choking on his own blood, the light fading from his eyes. Kroger fared no better. Enraged by Foryx's death, he charged Honsou's position with a pack of blood-mad warriors. But rage is a poor substitute for strategy. Honsou lured Kroger into the collapsed manufactorum at the edge of the breach. Charges placed days before, under the guise of sabotage, detonated as Kroger's forces entered the kill zone. Rubble rained down, mortar shells cratered the ground. In the chaos, Honsou's chosen champions cut through the survivors like wolves among sheep. Kroger himself staggered from the wreckage, one horned pauldron torn away, roaring defiance. Honsou met him with a bolter round to the throat. Thus did the sons of Perturabo feast upon their own entrails. Thus did power fall to the one who had suffered the longest, waited the most patiently, and struck the most ruthlessly. In the bloody dawn that followed, among the ash and bones of Hydra Cordatus, Honsou stood alone. He was not acclaimed. He was not celebrated. He was simply obeyed. Those who had survived the purges, embittered champions, warp-twisted artificers, and warbands with no loyalty but to strength, bent the knee before him. They called him Warsmith, not from love, but because to deny him was to die. Upon the ruins of Hydra Cordatus, Honsou reforged Collingol's shattered banners anew. No longer would he be the half-breed. No longer would he be the outcast. He was the Warsmith, Lord of Collingol, master of his own destiny. And though Hydra Cordatus burned behind him and the Imperium mourned its fallen bastion, Honsou's gaze was already turned forward, to conquest, to vengeance, to the endless war that would carve his name into the bones of the galaxy. His iron heart beat a singular rhythm, not brotherhood, not loyalty, only victory. The fires of Hydra Cordatus had cooled into ash. The banners of Collingol snapped over a battered but sovereign fortress reclaimed by the hand of a new master. Honsou, once the half-breed, now Warsmith, returned to Medrengard with blood on his blade and ambition burning like a sun within his chest. Yet victory at Hydra Cordatus was not enough. No Iron Warrior could rebuild a legion with crumbling weapons and broken men. Honsou needed an army. And armies, he knew, could not be bought. They had to be forged. Beneath the basalt cliffs of Kalangol, within its poisoned depths, Honsou set to work. He called his new sanctum the Forge, but it was no smithy for mere metal. It was a factory of flesh, of horror, of profanities against nature and sanity alike. To replenish the Iron Warriors, he would need more than recruits. He would need new brothers, birthed not from tradition but from suffering. At the heart of his grim project lay the stolen prize of Hydra Caudatus, the pure, untainted gene seed of the Imperial Fists. This was the irony he savored, that from the blood of their hated enemies, the Iron Warriors would rise again. Yet, the gene seed alone was not enough. Space Marines are not born, but made, shaped through rites, surgeries, conditioning. And Honsou did not have the carefully tended facilities of Mars or the bio-cathedrals of ancient Terra. He had Kalan Gol, he had desperation, and he had no limits. From the dark corners of the Eye of Terror, he summoned flesh crafters and sorcerers, the mad, the desperate, the damned. Apothecaries who had long since fallen from grace, their minds twisted by the warp. Demon smiths who whispered secrets in blood and bone. Under Honsou's cold command, they built the Daemonkulaba. Imagine, if you can, a chamber the size of a cathedral, its walls stitched with flesh and brass. Great vats filled with embryonic sludge hung from chains of iron and sinew. Within them floated the writhing forms of those condemned to transformation. The process was hideous beyond description. Mortal slaves, plucked from Kalan Gol's starving ghettos, were fed into the Daemonkulaba. Their bodies were surgically opened, their organs twisted and rewired to serve as wombs. The stolen gene seed was implanted into these unwilling hosts, forcing an unnatural gestation. Most died screaming. Others birthed abominations, hulking, mutant monstrosities barely capable of breathing, let alone waging war. These failures, the vast majority, were discarded without mercy, their corpses left to rot in the toxic ash fields outside the fortress walls. Yet a few, a precious few, survived the nightmare. These creatures were stronger than mortal men, infused with the corrupted might of the Adeptus Astartes. They bore bulging muscles, hardened bone plates, and the savage instincts of predators. They were not beautiful, they were not perfect, but they were useful. Honsou's new legion began to take shape, a brutal breed of warriors birthed from horror, bound by nothing but loyalty to their Warsmith. He named the strongest of them the Iron Warriors Reborn. The rest, those too twisted to wield a bolter, those whose minds snapped under the weight of their transformation, he cast into the wastes. Out there, among the poisoned valleys of Medrengard, the rejects became something else. They became known as the Unfleshed. Savage and broken, these wretched creatures roamed the wastelands in packs. Some remembered dim echoes of their creation, a hatred for their makers, a longing for acceptance that would never come. They howled Honsou's name into the black storms, a sound that would chill even the hardest Iron Warrior's blood. But Honsou did not fear them. In his eyes, the Unfleshed were not failures. They were a lesson, a reminder that weakness had no place among the Iron Warriors, a reminder that only the strongest deserved to serve. Time and again, his lieutenants questioned the horrors of the Forge. Men like Kadaris Grendel, a grizzled veteran of 100 sieges, asked why they relied on such imperfect stock. Honsou's answer was simple. Perfection is a lie, endurance is truth, and endure they would. With the Daemonkulaba spewing forth new warriors, Honsou began assembling a force unlike anything seen since the Long War's earliest days. Not merely Iron Warriors, but Siege Masters reborn. Each warrior was armed with relics torn from the vaults of fallen worlds. Demon engines lumbered among them, walking siege batteries fashioned from bound demons and shattered vehicles. Sorcerers stitched the living and the dead together into weapons of terrifying ingenuity. Artillery pieces fed by the souls of slaves, plasma cannons shrieking with trapped warp entities. It was not an army built for defense. It was an army built for annihilation. And yet, even as Carlin Gol grew strong once more, whispers spread through the fortress, whispers that Honsou's creations were an abomination even by the standards of chaos, that the Warsmith was playing a dangerous game, forging not a legion, but a curse. Even among his own ranks, the seeds of dissent were planted. For in the eye of terror, strength alone earns loyalty, and even strength can rot if left to fester too long. Honsou knew this. He welcomed it. Let the weak conspire and gnash their teeth. Let them see the forge and recoil in horror. He was not building an army to survive the eye. He was building an army to tear down everything the Imperium held sacred, to destroy not just walls and fortresses, but the very idea of safety. And when the forge fires of Carlin Gol guttered and smoked with the last screams of the Daimonkulaba's victims, Honsou stood upon the battlements and watched the first of his new legion march into formation. Their armor was crude, their movements brutish, their souls were stitched together with hate and madness. But they were his iron sons, born not of tradition, not of loyalty, but of iron will and boundless cruelty. And soon the galaxy would learn what true siegecraft meant. Not walls and towers, not trenches and cannons, but terror. Thus the Demon Forge was born, and from its black fires a nightmare began to walk the stars. In the eye of terror, strength is the only law, but strength alone is never enough. Victory invites envy, power breeds rivals, and among the Iron Warriors, sons of Perturabo, masters of bitter pride, no triumph goes unchallenged. Carlin Gol burned bright once more under Honsou's iron hand. Its forges thundered night and day. The ranks of his army swelled with fresh abominations. Siege engines howled as they came to life, stitched together from demon and machine. But far across the toxic plains and shattered moons of Medrengard, other warsmiths watched. They saw what Honsou had built. The Daimonkulaaba, the reborn Iron Warriors, the monstrous legions straining for war. They saw and they hungered. Chief among them were Toramino and Barossus, ancient names, bitter relics of 1,000 sieges past. Warsmith Toramino, a cold and calculating butcher whose fortress, Carcaladon, was said to be carved from the petrified remains of a star god. Warsmith Barossus, an ancient warrior entombed within a dreadnought frame so vast and corrupted that demons fought for the right to inhabit its hollowed limbs. These two had endured the long war's endless grind. They had suffered the humiliation of defeat, the slow rot of exile, and they would not suffer a half-breed, a pretender, to rise above them. To them, Honsou was an affront, a mongrel crowned with stolen laurels. They marched for Carlin Gol. First came the messengers, black-armored envoys bearing the sigils of Carcaladon and the ashen sarcophagus. They arrived beneath Carlin Gol's iron gates, their voices stripped of honor. Their demands were simple: submit, relinquish the stolen gene seed, dissolve your claim to Carlin Gol, return to the dirt from whence you came, half-breed. Honsou received them in the Hall of Chains, seated upon the throne of reclamation, a brutal seat forged from the weapons of the dead warsmiths he had slain. He listened in silence as the messengers spat their threats. Around him, the walls wept molten iron. The air tasted of burning blood. When they finished, Honsou rose. He did not shout. He did not rage. He simply walked down the steps of his throne, drew his bolt pistol, and executed the envoys where they stood. Blood sprayed across the hall's black marble. The Iron Warriors who witnessed the act knelt in approval. There was no room for diplomacy among the sons of Perturabo. Only strength mattered, only fear. The gauntlet had been thrown. War was inevitable. Across the desolate plains of Medrengard, Toromino and Berossus gathered their forces. From the cursed manufactorums of Car Caledon came siege tanks bristling with diamond-bound ordnance. From the tomb fortresses of the Ashen Sarcophagus came black dreadnoughts, howling in eternal rage. Thousand upon thousand of Chaos Space Marines, mutants, and demon engines assembled under banners that had not flown together since the Siege of Terra itself. In the Eye of Terra, armies are not summoned lightly. Every warrior, every war machine, represents centuries of bitter survival. And now 2 ancient Warsmiths pledged it all to tear Honsou from his throne. Yet Kalangol did not tremble. Honsou welcomed their challenge. He spent no time reinforcing walls or digging deeper trenches. He knew that Kalangol would not be won by mere stone and mortar. It would be won by the brutality he had forged in the heart of the Daemon Kulaba. His new army, crude, savage, monstrous, was not built to withstand siege. It was built to break sieges. As the enemy host encircled Kalangol, Honsou prepared his reply. When the first artillery shells fell, bloated things of shrieking flesh and iron, Honsou did not order a defensive bombardment. He ordered the gates opened, and out surged his legions. The battlefield became a nightmare. The unfleshed, once banished to the ash wastes, were unleashed at the vanguard, screaming their broken hatred. Behind them came the Demonculaba-born warriors, wielding twisted siege weapons that spat bone shrapnel and warp flame. And towering above them all, demon engines stitched together from the ruins of Kalangol's ancient defenses, lumbered into the fray. Honsou led from the front, his hammer in one hand and a relic plasma blaster, stolen from the vaults of Tor Christo, roaring in the other. His strategy was brutal and brilliant. He would not allow Toromino and Berossus to settle into a siege. He met their armies in the no-man's land between the fortresses, turning the field into a cauldron of blood and fire. For days the slaughter raged. Toromino's siege companies were ground into ash. Berossus's dreadnoughts howled in rage as Honsou's demon engines tore them limb from rusted limb. And in the heart of the maelstrom, Honsou hunted. He sought not the armies. He sought the Warsmiths themselves. When Toromino finally showed himself, leading a desperate countercharge to reclaim a breach in the eastern quarter, Honsou was waiting. The duel was short and merciless. Toromino fought with the elegance of an old campaigner, his war scythe slicing apart demon machines with surgical precision. But elegance means nothing when faced with brutality. Honsou shattered Toromino's blade with his hammer, crushed the Warsmith's knee with a booted stomp, and tore the helmet from his rival's head. He held Toromino's broken body aloft before the Iron Warriors, letting them see what defiance bought. Then he dropped the corpse into the mud, spat once and turned away. Berossus fared no better. Trapped within his ancient dreadnought shell, he fought like a cornered beast. But even a beast can be caged. Honsou ordered his sorcerers to bind Berossus with psychic chains, dragging the twitching war machine into the heart of Kalangol. There, before the jeering Iron Warriors, Honsou dismantled Berossus piece by piece, a public execution not just of flesh, but of legacy. When Berossus's core finally died, Honsou mounted the Warsmith's shattered sarcophagus atop Kalangol's gates as a warning. Strength had spoken. Kalangol was supreme, and Honsou's rule was absolute. The ashes of the fallen Warsmiths were ground into the forge fires of Kalangol. Their banners were ripped and remade. Their surviving warriors bent the knee or joined the Demonculaba's next cycle. Honsou, standing atop the highest battlement, gazed out across the plains of Medrengard and saw no rivals, only opportunity. The Imperium trembled beyond the eye, the Bloodborne stirred in the shadows, and Warsmith Honsou, the mongrel prince of iron and spite, prepared to turn his gaze outward once more. The long war called, and Honsou would answer it with fire and ruin. Long after the echoes of Toromino and Berossus had been silenced, a shadow crept across Kalangol. A shadow unseen and unexpected, born not of chaos, but of vengeance and fate. His name was Uriel Ventris, a son of Ultramar, a warrior of the hated Imperial Fist's bloodline, by way of Robout Guilliman's stoic creed. He was not a warsmith. He was not a demon-haunted champion. He was merely a captain, a mortal thorn lodged deep within the rotting heart of chaos. But in time, Ventris would become Honsou's most persistent nemesis. It began in whispers. Kalangol's sentries reported sightings of movement in the ashen fields, figures that did not belong to the usual mad survivors of the wastes. Patrols vanished. Alarms rang hollowly in the deeper vaults. The fortress's blood-stained halls, accustomed to the brutal certainty of war, felt uneasy. Honsou, seated upon the throne of reclamation, listened to these reports with growing interest. Not fear, never fear, but interest. For Kalangol had stood against demon incursions, internal uprisings, and the combined might of rival warsmiths. What could trouble it now? He dispatched hunting packs, grim bands of chaos marines and mutant trackers, into the lower manufactorums and waste tunnels. Few returned. Those that did spoke of phantoms, of sudden ambushes in the dark, of precise and clinical slaughter. Honsou narrowed his eyes. Precision and discipline were the hallmarks of a foe he knew all too well. It was not long before he uncovered the truth. Uriel Ventris had come, accompanied by Pausanias Lysane, his loyal brother-in-arms, a giant even by Space Marine standards, whose left arm was a marvel of living metal wrought by the Adeptus Mechanicus. Ventris had infiltrated the Eye of Terror in defiance of every sane instinct. They had followed the stench of Hydra Caudatus's death, tracked the bloody footprints of Honsou's ambition across the stars, and now they stood at the very gates of his empire. Their mission was simple: to find and destroy the Demonculaba, to rip out the beating heart of Honsou's nascent army before it could reach maturity. Honsou smiled when he learned this, not out of amusement, but admiration. Few had the audacity to strike so deep. Fewer still survived to tell of it. He would ensure Ventris and Lysane were no exception. He set his traps with meticulous care. He left sections of the fortress seemingly unguarded, corridors that would draw infiltrators like moths to a flame. He sent false echoes across the Vox channels, fragments of orders, whispers of gene seed transport, bait carefully laid. And when the Ultramarines took the bait, the jaws of Kalangol snapped shut. Ventris and Lysane were captured within the black holes of the Demonculaba itself, the very heart of horror they had come to destroy. The Warsmith ordered them brought before him, battered but alive. They were paraded through the fortress like trophies, a living humiliation for the Loyalists. Honsou watched them with cold curiosity. Ventris, proud even in chains. Pausanias, silent and seething, the living metal of his augmetic arm flexing with restrained fury. These were not the broken slaves that the Eye of Terror so often produced. These were warriors, and warriors deserved a personal touch. Honsou descended from his throne, his crimson cloak trailing behind him like a bloody tide. He circled his prisoners, studying them. His gaze lingered on Pausanias's metal arm, a marvel of loyalist engineering, infinitely superior to the crude augmetics of Kalangol. A hunger stirred within the Warsmith, not for Pausanias's life, for his arm. Without hesitation, Honsou ordered the tech priest to remove it. Pausanias's roar of agony echoed through the vaults as saw blades bit into flesh and bone. Ventress struggled against his captors, fury blazing in his eyes, but he could do nothing. The arm was torn away, leaving Pausanias a maimed, bleeding wreck. Honsou admired the severed limb, feeling its weight in his hands. Here was a prize worthy of a Warsmith. Here was a tool he would fashion into something greater than its maker had ever intended. In the days that followed, Honsou had the arm surgically grafted to his own body, replacing the crude prosthesis lost at Hydra Cordatus. The living metal responded to him, adapting to his strength, whispering promises of newfound power. He would wear the enemy's craft like a badge of victory. And when he crushed Ultramar beneath his heel, he would do so with a weapon stolen from their own kin. As for Ventress and Pausanias, Honsou had no intention of granting them quick deaths. He cast them into the deepest vaults of Karlan Gol, among the unfleshed and the Daimonkulaba's worst failures. He wanted them to see what he had created. He wanted them to witness the abominations spawned from the gene seed they had failed to protect, to feel the weight of their failure pressing down upon them, heavier than any chain. Yet fate, as ever, had other plans. In the rotting darkness among the broken and the damned, Ventress found allies. The unfleshed, twisted and tormented as they were, recognized something in him, a glimmer of compassion, a memory of a past before horror consumed them. Under Ventress's leadership, the unfleshed rose up. They turned against their creators, storming the laboratories and slaughtering the demon smiths who had wrought their misery. The heart of Karlan Gol shook with rebellion. Alarms screamed. Demon engines howled in confusion. Honsou watched, momentarily stunned, as his carefully crafted order disintegrated into chaos. And in the center of the maelstrom, Uriel Ventress moved like a blade, cutting a path toward freedom. The impossible was happening. An ultramarine was tearing the heart from the Warsmiths' empire. And Honsou, for the first time in his ascendant reign, tasted the bitter sting of loss. He roared for his warriors to crush the uprising, to bring him Ventress's head. But it was too late. The fires of rebellion had been lit. And from the shadows of Karlan Gol, Uriel Ventress carved a legacy that Honsou would never forget. Thus the shadows lengthened, and the seeds of Honsou's downfall were sown by the blade of an unexpected foe. The halls of Karlan Gol groaned under the weight of rebellion. The air, once thick with the mechanical hum of forges and the growl of siege beasts, now rang with the sounds of war within. Bolter fire echoed through corridors lined with the banners of Honsou's victories. Smoke coiled from shattered manufactorums. Blood, both crimson and black, pooled along the iron veins of the fortress. Uriel Ventress and his ragged horde of unfleshed had torn the heart from the Daimonkulaba's labs. Yet it was not only the prisoners who rose in defiance. The ancient resentments that had smoldered among Honsou's lieutenants for years now flared into open betrayal. Like wolves smelling weakness, they turned on each other. First came the warbands sworn to Toramino's fallen standard. They had bent the knee when Honsou slew their master, but loyalty given under duress is loyalty poised to break. Led by the bitter sorcerer Votek Kral, they unleashed their demonic war hosts within the outer bastions, attempting to seize Karlan Gol's armories for themselves. Then came the defectors from Barossus's dread legions, those who had never forgiven Honsou for dismantling their Warsmith's sarcophagus in public humiliation. They sabotaged the plasma reactors, plunging entire wings of the fortress into darkness. In the span of hours, Karlan Gol, once the symbol of Honsou's unbreakable will, had become a battlefield. Honsou stood at the apex of the central spire, the throne of reclamation, looming above him like a silent judge. Around him, the few loyal captains remaining prepared for battle without hesitation or question. Grendel, the brutal champion once sworn to Berossus, now Honsou's blooded executioner. Arderic Venus, the fallen raven god, ever hungry for a cause worthy of betrayal. The clone they had named the Newborn, a twisted echo of Uriel Ventris himself, crafted in mockery and spite, and looming above all the bound demon host Onyx, a mountain of muscle and sorcery chained to Honsou's will. Together they formed a bulwark against the rising tide. But even Honsou, for all his iron pride, knew this was not a battle of soldiers alone. This was a battle for Kalin Gol's soul. The enemy came in waves. First the traitorous Iron Warriors, hurling themselves at the inner sanctum with siege drills and warp bolts. Honsou met them head-on, leading counter-assaults through blast-torn corridors. His hammer shattered ceramite and bone alike. His plasma blaster reduced whole squads to screaming heaps of molten flesh. The clone Newborn fought at his side, a silent reflection of the real Ventris, killing without hesitation, without mercy. Varnes, laughing like a madman, danced among the enemy ranks, twin bolt pistols barking death. Grendel waded through the melee like a living battering ram, crushing those who dared stand before him. The blood of traitors painted the iron walls, and for a time it seemed that Honsou's iron will might yet snuff out rebellion as he had so many times before. But the second wave broke differently. It was not a war band that came next. It was the unfleshed, twisted, malformed creatures who had once been Honsou's greatest experiment, and now his most bitter curse. They surged through the ruins of the Demonculaba, driven by a madness beyond reason, by a hatred so pure it burned brighter than any devotion to chaos. Their howls filled the fortress like the dirges of lost souls. They tore through barricades with hands and claws. They shrugged off bolter rounds as if they were rain, and at their head marched Uriel Ventris, clad in scavenged armor, eyes burning with grim determination. Honsou saw him from atop the steps of the throne and felt a flicker of something he had not known since Hydra Caudatus. Not fear. Rage. Ventris had dared to wound his empire. He would pay for it in blood. Honsou ordered his champions forward. The Newborn met Ventris halfway, blade drawn, the mirror of a mirror. They clashed amid the wreckage, twin reflections locked in a brutal dance of blades and oaths. Around them, Kalin Gol tore itself apart. The unfleshed fell upon the remaining defenders with reckless abandon. Siege beasts screamed as they were dragged down. Demon engines howled in rage and confusion, firing blindly into the melee. And still the spire stood. Still Honsou stood, for he had not forgotten the final weapon forged in the heart of Kalin Gol. Buried deep beneath the fortress was the heart of blood, a diamond engine bound in ancient times, fed by the screams of 100,000 slaves. Honsou had always intended it as a last resort, a weapon to be unleashed only if Kalin Gol itself faced annihilation. That time had come. He descended the inner stairways, leaving Grendel and Vanes to hold the line. Ventris, still locked in deadly combat with the Newborn, did not see him go. Through the shattered lower vaults he strode, past the gutted ruins of the Demonculaba until he reached the prison where the Heart of Blood had slumbered. With a whispered invocation and a bloodletting of his own flesh, Honsou shattered the runes of binding. The heart awoke. It rose in a tide of brass and sinew, a shrieking mass of demonic fury and machine hate. Bound no longer by logic or loyalty, it lashed out at everything: Iron Warrior, unfleshed, sorcerer, traitor. The fortress trembled beneath its wrath. Honsou turned away, leaving the demon to its feast. He ascended the crumbling spire once more, surveying the chaos. Kalin Gol burned from within, but he smiled, for though his throne crumbled, his will endured. The galaxy was wide, and vengeance was patient. Thus, the throne of Kalengol cracked, and the Warsmith prepared for wars yet to come. The walls of Kalengol wept molten iron. The ground heaved with every bellow of the heart of blood, the demon engine unleashed from its prison deep beneath the fortress. In the shattered courtyards, where once banners of the Iron Warriors had flown proud, now chaos reigned. No longer a place of siege and order, Kalengol had become a crucible of rage. Above it all, in the blackened sky where the Eye of Terror's storms churned, Honsou stood atop the highest battlement, watching his empire burn. To some, it might have seemed a defeat. To Honsou, it was evolution. The fortress was just a carcass now, a shell unfit for the army he envisioned. The wars to come would require more than walls. They would require fire and vengeance. Honsou turned from the ruins below and began to move, not with haste, not with panic, but with deliberate purpose. The heart of blood had been unleashed not merely to destroy his enemies, but to cover his escape. In the catacombs beneath Kalengol, amid the labyrinthine wreckage of siege vaults and demon forges, Honsou activated contingencies long prepared. Hidden teleportariums, old heresies stolen from the dark mechanicum, flared to life. With him went the loyal remnants of his force. Grendel, wounded but alive, Arderic Vons, grinning even as he bled, and the broken but still dangerous shell of the clone, the newborn who had been grievously wounded by Uriel Ventress's blade, but still crawled forward on one good arm, snarling defiance. The Warsmith had not saved Kalengol. He had saved what mattered, himself, his champions, and the knowledge to build anew. As the last teleport flare swallowed him from the eye-blasted ruins, Honsou cast one final glance over his shoulder. Flames leapt from tower to tower. The heart of blood, shrieking in endless hunger, tore a siege tower in half with a single claw. A smile twisted across Honsou's scarred features. Let the Ultramarines think they had won. Let Ventress believe he had struck a mortal blow. In truth, Honsou was not defeated. He was free, and he would be far more dangerous than any fortress left behind. You cannot kill iron, he thought. You cannot extinguish hate. You can only sharpen it. They reappeared on a derelict orbital platform high above Medrengard, a place forgotten even by the warbands of the Eye. Time meant little here, only cold void and shattered metal. But it was enough. Enough to plan. Enough to strike. Wasting no time, Honsou convened his broken warriors. They gathered in a rusted chamber open to the void, where ancient statues of broken saints wept tears of ice. The fortress is lost, Grendel growled, spitting blood onto the iron deck. Honsou turned his gaze upon him, and the old warrior fell silent. No, Honsou said, his voice colder than the vacuum beyond the sundered hull. Kalengol was a chrysalis. We have emerged stronger. Stronger? Vanes laughed harshly. We've lost the forges, the Demonkalaba. And in losing them, Honsou cut across him, we have shed our chains. He stepped forward, the living metal of his stolen arm gleaming. Walls are weaknesses. Fortresses are tombs waiting to happen. I will not be a lord of ruins. I will be the architect of ruin itself. Silence fell. Even Vanes, whose soul bowed to nothing, recognized the fire in the Warsmith's eyes. In the cycles that followed, Honsou began gathering the wreckage of his power. From the drifting hulks of dead warships in Medrengard's orbit, he salvaged engines, armor, and weapons. He forged a fleet, crude, brutal, but swift, a strike force instead of a fortress. Mutants, renegades, and war beasts came to his call. Some had served Toramino or Barosis. Others were drifters who smelled opportunity in the blood-scented wind. Honsou welcomed them all. He promised not security, not honor, but war without end, and in the Eye of Terror there was no finer coin. Yet even as he rebuilt, a greater hunger gnawed at him. A hunger not for mere survival, a hunger for vengeance. Hydra Cordatus had fallen by his hand, Kalangol had burned by his will, but neither had struck at the heart of his true enemy. Neither had answered the slight that still festered like a wound, the insult of Uriel Ventress. On the derelict platform's command deck, under the shifting storms of the Eye, Honsou mapped the path of his next conquest. Not Medrengard, not the Eye, the Imperium itself. He traced the stars to a small, vulnerable jewel in the eastern fringe, Tarsis Ultra, a world that Ventress had once saved from the jaws of the great Devourer. A world tied by blood and memory to the Ultramarines. A symbol. To destroy it would not just be to ravage a planet. It would be to scar Ventress's soul, to rip open the heart of the Imperium's ideals. In the endless dark, Honsou swore his new oath. I will not merely break worlds. I will break the spirit of my enemies. His fleet took shape, jagged hulls patched with demon hide and stolen Imperial wreckage. His armies gathered, warbands of fallen Astartes, heretic psychers, and beasts drawn from the nightmare edges of the Eye. And at the heart of it all stood the Warsmith, unbowed, unbroken, reborn in hate. No fortress could hold him, no wall could contain him. He would forge a storm to sweep across Ultramar, and Ventress would feel its wrath. He would raise Tarsis Ultra to ash. And when the fires guttered low, when the last cries of the dying faded into the void, the Imperium would know that Honsou had not fallen at Kalangol. He had risen. Thus was the heart of vengeance kindled, and from its flames, a nightmare took flight once more. Beyond the boiling storms of the Eye of Terror, beyond the shattered fringes of the Segmentum Tempestus, there spun a wounded world. Tarsis Ultra, once a shining jewel of imperial might, a world of wide agri-fields and hive cities, rich in crops and souls, a vital artery in the endless hunger of the Imperium's wars, a world once saved from annihilation by the blade of Uriel Ventress, and now a world that bore the mark of its savior with pride. Statues of the Ultramarines, Captain adorned the plazas, hymns sang of his valor, streets bore his name. But Honsou saw no honor there, only opportunity. The heart of vengeance beat louder now, and it led him straight to Tarsis Ultra. A blow against Ventress himself, a wound not of flesh but of soul. The voyage from Medrengard to the Imperium's edge was perilous. Even with demon engines shrieking in the void, even with Warsmiths singing blasphemies to the Neverborn, Honsou's fleet endured storms that could tear reality into ribbons. Twice monstrous shapes clawed at their hulls in the warp. Once, a ship, the blood of Perturabo, was swallowed whole by a chasm that screamed with the voices of dead gods. Yet Honsou pressed onward, his mind fixed upon the prize. His fleet emerged into real space beyond the Torrentus Rift, wounded but intact. Before them hung Tarsis Ultra, a blue-green orb cradled in the darkness, blissfully unaware of the doom hurtling toward it. Honsou wasted no time. The first blow fell in silence. In orbit, the old Imperial defense satellites blinked into activity, their long slumbering weapons powering up. Too late. Honsou's vanguard, stolen assault craft, warp-infused boarding torpedoes, struck first. They crashed through the orbital platforms like meteors, ripping apart the defenders before alarms could even be sounded. Skitarii crews fought back with stubborn precision, but they were outmatched. Boarding teams of iron warriors, crude, savage, and unstoppable, scythed through them like blades through wheat. Within hours, the orbital defenses were crippled. The skies of Tarsis Ultra were left vulnerable. Honsou prepared his masterpiece, Deep within the hold of his flagship, the Stoneheart, a weapon awaited. A single torpedo. No larger than a Thunderhawk, it seemed almost laughable compared to the vastness of the armies Honsou had once unleashed. Yet within it sloshed the most potent terror he had ever crafted. The Heraclitus virus. A stolen relic of the Mechanicus, augmented and perverted beyond recognition. Designed to consume not men, but ecosystems. A plague not of flesh, but of earth and sky. Once unleashed, it would transform the very life of Tarsis Ultra into a weapon against itself. Crops would overgrow and strangle cities. Forests would twist into carnivorous nightmares. Oceans would choke in algae blooms that stank of death. And the people would suffer not through clean annihilation, but slow, suffocating despair. A death by inches. A death worthy of Honsou's vengeance. The torpedo was fired with little ceremony. No grand invasion, no declarations of war. Just a single silent missile, screaming down through the stratosphere. It struck the high atmosphere above the prime agribelts, and the Heraclitus virus bloomed. Green clouds spread like ink spilled in water. Rain turned to acid. Crops, once so carefully nurtured, grew at impossible rates, twisting into grotesque parodies of life. Vines strangled irrigation systems. Stalks of wheat as thick as a man's thigh burst through the windows of hab units, impaling the inhabitants within. The great hive cities of Tarsis Ultra, Solon's Gate, Lucerne, Hive Malorne found their lower levels choked in hours. Roots tore through plasteel. Branches strangled mag trains. Entire districts vanished beneath carpets of bloated, hungry vegetation. The Adeptus Arbites responded first, their riot suppression forces ill-equipped for a war against nature itself. They torched fields, bombarded growing forests with promethium strikes. It availed them nothing. For every acre they burned, 10 more mutated in its place. Then the PDF mobilized, tanks rolling into fields, aircraft strafing choking jungles. But still the death creep spread. And through it all, the people of Tarsis Ultra cried out to the heavens for salvation. Cried out for the Ultramarines. Cried out for Uriel Ventris. But there would be no salvation. Ventris was light years away, embroiled in other wars. The Ultramarines could not come. No chapter would arrive in time to save this world. Honsou had made certain of it. He had struck at their pride, at their helplessness, and in doing so he had scarred their souls far deeper than any battlefield victory ever could. High above the dying world, aboard the Stoneheart, Honsou watched. His living metal hand flexed, the prize taken from Pausanias, still functioning perfectly, a constant reminder of the old wounds. His lieutenants gathered around him, Grendel grim and silent, Varnes smiling like a hyena at the apocalypse unfolding below. A beautiful sight, Varnes muttered. Honsou said nothing. Beauty was for fools. This was vengeance. As Tarsis Ultra choked on its own life, as the hive cities collapsed under the weight of their own mutated crops, Honsou turned his gaze outward once more. This was only the beginning. The Imperium was a vast, rotting empire, and he had found its soft underbelly. He would strike again, and again, until even the sons of Guilliman, even the Emperor's bright dream, drowned beneath vines of death and despair. Thus fell Tarsis Ultra, not to blade or bolter, but to vengeance sharper than any steel. Tarsis Ultra choked beneath a blanket of death. The Heraclitus virus spread like wildfire across the agri-world's vast plains, suffocating cities and crumbling defenses. Above it, in the cold void, Honsou stood victorious. But the Warsmith was no fool. One victory, no matter how sweet, was not enough. No single wound could bleed the Imperium dry. To carry his war deeper, to challenge the might of Ultramar itself, Honsou needed more than vengeance. He needed strength. He needed an army that could drown the stars in blood, and so his gaze turned to a place where the strong gathered, where warlords feasted on the bones of the weak, a place called New Badab. New Badab, the black heart of the Maelstrom, a haven for pirates, renegades, and traitor marines, all ruled by Huron Blackheart, the tyrant of Badab, master of the Red Corsairs, a realm where law meant nothing, and only strength spoke true. And there, upon broken worlds and shattered moons, the most savage gathering of warriors in the Maelstrom took place, the Skull Harvest, a brutal, blood-soaked tournament where warbands clashed to the death for the right to claim followers, weapons, and glory. Honsou set course immediately. His fleet, scarred but resolute, slipped into the swirling storms of the Maelstrom. Shipwrecks and demon-racked asteroids drifted like tombstones across their path. But none dared challenge the Warsmith. His name, whispered with fear and respect, preceded him. They arrived at the Red Shard, a hollowed-out worldlet where the Skull Harvest took place. Hundreds of banners flew from the broken towers, icons of fallen chapters, twisted heraldry of lost legions, the black sigil of the Corsairs looming over them all. Below, the Arena of Thorns yawned wide, a vast pit lined with jagged obsidian, where thousands of blood-hungry warriors gathered to witness slaughter. Honsou disembarked with his chosen, Grendel, the Iron Giant, whose warhammer cracked ceramite like glass, Arderic Vanes, fast and treacherous, guns spinning in both hands, and the Newborn, the twisted clone of Uriel Ventris, armored in scavenged plate, his face a distorted mirror of loyalty and defiance. As Honsou stepped into the arena, the cries of the gathered warbands rose into a deafening roar. Here he would not command by decree. Here he would earn his army by right of blood. The rules were simple. Enter the arena, kill all who oppose you, survive. Opponents came fast and furious, packs of traitor Astartes from unknown legions, their colors faded and smeared. Xenos mercenaries with curved blades dripping with venom. Even rogue psychers, their minds ablaze with unstable sorcery. Honsou unleashed his fury without hesitation. His hammer shattered helms and spine alike. His plasma fire reduced mutants to smoldering ruin. Vaughns weaved among the enemy, twin bolt pistols barking death in perfect rhythm. Grendel tore through bodies like a living siege machine. And the Newborn, oh the Newborn, moved with a silent surgical precision, dispatching enemies with clean, efficient strikes. One by one, the lesser warlords fell. The arena floor grew slick with gore. Only the strongest remained. At last, the final challengers revealed themselves. Pashtok, a berserker of Khorne, clad in blood-red armor so thick that heavy bolters barely scratched it, and Notha Etase, a champion of Slanesh, whose blade flickered with impossible speed, severing flesh and thought alike. Two monsters, each backed by warbands, hundreds strong, each eager to claim the Skull Harvest's prize. Honsou met them without fear. This was the moment he had prepared for. He had not come to fight alone. He had come to conquer. The battle erupted in a hurricane of violence. Pashtok charged like a living avalanche, his demon axe shrieking for blood. Honsou caught the blow with his augmented arm, the same living metal once torn from Pausanias, and shoved the berserker back with a thunderous hammer strike that cracked the arena floor. Etase darted in from the flank, her blade a blur. Vanes intercepted her, guns blazing, but even he could not match her unnatural speed. She danced around him, leaving a trail of blood in her wake. Grendel roared and hurled himself at Pashtok, grappling the berserker in a brutal clash of strength. The two giants staggered and traded blows that shook the earth itself. Meanwhile, the newborn found his target, Itasei. He closed the distance with mechanical swiftness, catching her by surprise. Her blade flickered and missed. His did not. With a savage lunge, the newborn drove his combat knife into her side, twisting it deep. Itasei gasped, and the spell of her speed was broken. Vannes finished her with a double tap to the head. Only Pashtok remained, blood-drunk, roaring, unstoppable. Grendel staggered, his armor cracked. Pashtok raised his axe for the killing blow, but Honsou was already moving. He ripped a fallen spear from the ground and hurled it with all his strength. It punched through Pashtok's side, staggering the berserker. In that moment of weakness, Grendel struck, hammer to skull. Pashtok's helm crumpled. The berserker fell. The arena fell silent. Then, slowly, the warbands began to chant. Honsou, Honsou, Honsou. The prize was his. 17,000 warriors, renegade Astartes, mutant battalions, demon beasts, an army worthy of war. Huron Blackheart himself, watching from his black throne, offered a grim smile. Victory at the Skull Harvest came at a cost. Alliances were fragile. Betrayal was certain. Huron's parting words were clear. Kill your champions before they kill you. Honsou merely nodded. He had no illusions. He would not command with loyalty. He would command with terror. And with this army, this storm of iron, blood, and hate, he would march on the heart of Ultramar itself. Thus the harvest of skulls was reaped, and the galaxy trembled at what would follow. The Bloodborne gathered beneath the sky of broken stars, on the decks of the Stoneheart, and the warped husks of countless captured ships. They waited. A tide of warriors, mutants, war beasts, and demon engines. Their banners, torn and blackened, snapped in the warp-torn winds. Their chants, half prayer, half threat, echoed through the rusting hulls. They were not a legion. They were something worse, a virus of war ready to spread. And at their head stood Honsou. The Warsmith watched from the Stoneheart's command dais, armored in black iron plate streaked with the blood of 100 foes. His hammer rested against the edge of the dais, and the living metal of his stolen augmetic arm flexed unconsciously, eager for violence. Before him, his captains knelt in rough semicircle. Grendel, massive and scarred, his armor dented from the brawls he encouraged just to weed out weakness among their new forces. Arderic Vannes, ever restless, twirling a combat blade between his fingers, the air of rebellion always just a breath away. The newborn, a silent, twisted reflection of Uriel Ventress himself, crouched at the dais's edge like a predator waiting for command. Around them milled the masses of the Bloodborne, thousands of twisted space marines, renegade mortals, demon creatures born from nightmare and hate. Honsou spoke, and the fleet fell silent. "We have gathered strength," he said, his voice a low growl that carried through the vox grids. "We have feasted on weakness. Now we take war to the Imperium's heart." He activated a hololith. A star map flared into life, depicting a blue-green world ringed with the scars of ancient battle. Calth. A shrine world, a wounded relic of past wars. The Bloodborne roared approval. Honsou let the noise wash over him. He raised a hand and again silence fell. "We will not claim it. We will not conquer it. We will shatter it. We will salt its bones so that even memory recoils in terror." Preparations began immediately. Ship after ship refueled, rearmed, refitted for war. Honsou stalked the decks, inspecting the hordes he would unleash. His gaze was pitiless. Mutants deemed too feeble were culled. Traitor captains who showed hesitation were executed without ceremony. Vons personally oversaw the outfitting of strike teams, fast, mobile killers who would slip through Calth's defenses like knives between ribs. Grendel supervised the siege engines, demon-infested tanks and artillery crawlers, engines of brute force and pure annihilation. The newborn led squads of assassins, silent killers bred to sow terror before the full assault even began. Yet even all this strength was not enough. To destroy Calth, Honsou needed a weapon the Imperium could not anticipate. He needed something that hated Ultramar as much as he did. Deep within the Stoneheart's corrupted halls, Honsou and his sorcerers conducted the summoning. Ritual circles were carved into the flesh of the ship itself. Incantations in forbidden tongues were screamed into the void. Sacrifices, hundreds of souls, were burned as offerings. The air grew thick, heavy with ozone and raw malice. And then, through a gate of screaming light he came. Makar the Reborn, a demon prince of unfathomable hatred. Once defeated by the Ultramarines, imprisoned, humiliated, now free, now seething with rage. Makar coalesced in a swirling maelstrom of red mist and burning symbols, his form massive and ever-shifting, a fusion of warrior and horror. "You seek to desecrate Calth," the diamond rumbled, its voice splitting the air into jagged fractures. "I seek to end it," Honsou replied coldly. "Not merely conquer, but eradicate." Makar laughed, a sound like rusted chains grinding bone. "Then we are brothers in spirit, little Warsmith. Let us bleed them dry." The pact was made, and the Bloodborne sailed for Calth. Calth rose before them like a jewel stained by time. Clouds rolled sluggishly over crumbling cities and cratered plains, scars of the heresy's ancient battles. Orbiting defense platforms flickered to life, broadcasting hails and challenges. Honsou gave no reply. Instead, he unleashed the first wave. Warp missiles tore through void shields. Boarding pods, sheathed in demon hide and loaded with berserkers, punched into the planetary defenses. Automated bastions fired blindly into the storm, hitting nothing but smoke and illusions conjured by Honsou's sorcerers. Within hours, Calth's orbital defenses were crippled. The Bloodborne fell upon the planet like a plague of iron locusts. Dropships screamed through the atmosphere, vomiting warriors into the streets of Galea, of Harrow Deep, of New Axum. Tanks rolled from the skies, demon engines bellowing as they crushed the ruins of old Imperial temples. Mutants surged through broken hab blocks, slaughtering any who could not flee fast enough. In the ruined city of Galea, Honsou personally led the assault. His hammer rose and fell with brutal efficiency, pulping loyalist defenders in their shattered trenches. The smell of burning promethium and cooked flesh filled the air. Honsou kicked down the doors of a cathedral dedicated to Guilliman himself and leveled it with a single seismic charge, laughing as the great golden statue of the Primarch collapsed into dust. Across the city, the newborn moved unseen, eliminating command squads, cutting Vox relays, sowing confusion. Grendel led the heavy assault groups, smashing bastions open with war engines stitched from scavenged Mechanicus relics and demon-bound power cores. Vaughn's strike teams raided garrisons, turned the defenders' own weapons against them, leaving false Vox transmissions that drew reinforcements into ambush after ambush. And through it all, Makar's influence spread like a stain. Demons poured into the world through rents in reality, turning the sky into a writhing nightmare of tentacles, fanged stars, and shrieking clouds. The very ground rebelled against Calth's defenders. Streets twisted into bottomless maws, rivers boiled with blood. No sanctuary remained. No hope. Yet even amid the chaos, resistance flickered. Loyalist forces, Ultramarines, Raven Guard, Imperial fists rallied where they could, fighting desperate holding actions against overwhelming odds. Honsou respected their tenacity. He respected it and crushed it. Entire companies were buried alive beneath collapsed hab towers. Vox operators were hunted and silenced to cut communications. Supply lines were not merely severed, but poisoned, seeded with viral spores conjured by Honsou's war sorcerers. The Bloodborne's advance was relentless, block by block, city by city. Calth bled. Thus did the Bloodborne advance across Calth, a tide of iron, fire, and sorrow, and in their wake only ashes remained. Calth burned. Across its scarred plains and shattered cities, the fires of betrayal raged higher than the spires of the old imperial cathedrals. The Bloodborne swept across the surface like a living plague, their banners black against the crimson skies. And yet the heart of the campaign, the soul of the defiance yet unbroken, lay in a single place: Guilliman's Gate. There, amid the ancient ruins of Galea, rose the tomb of Remus Ventanus, sacred to the Ultramarines, a shrine built upon the bones of one of their greatest heroes. It was not merely stone and marble, it was a symbol, a wound that had never fully healed from the betrayal of the Horus heresy, and now it would bleed anew. Honsou stood at the foot of Guilliman's Gate, the battered gates torn open by Grendel's siege beasts. Smoke and ash churned around him. The air reeked of burning ceramite, ruptured promethium tanks, and scorched flesh. His iron boot ground the shattered remnants of ultramarine statues beneath his heel as he advanced. Around him, his warband howled for blood. Vaughns led raider squads through the perimeter, cutting off any loyalist reinforcements. Grendel smashed through defense lines with brutal certainty, his hammer pulverizing bunkers and walls with each titanic blow. The newborn, silent and ruthless, hunted command officers with predatory precision. Every bolt round, every demon howl, every death scream drove the defenders further back, deeper into the sanctified halls of the tomb itself. Inside the tomb's shattered vestibule, Sergeant Paulinus of the Ultramarines barked orders through bloodied lips. His surviving squad, battered, half their number fallen, dug in behind marble columns and cracked aquilae. They fought with desperation, knowing no reinforcement would come. Every man understood what was at stake. The shrine could not fall, not while they lived. They fired volley after volley into the oncoming Bloodborne. Bolt shells detonated amid howling mutants and traitor marines. Missile strikes blasted whole squads of twisted flesh and iron into ruin. For every foot of ground, the Bloodborne paid in blood. But it was not enough. The tide was too great. And then came Honsou. He strode through the breach like a living avatar of war, his hammer spitting blue fire, his plasma blaster hissing molten death. He moved with brutal grace, ignoring wounds that would have crippled lesser men. Bolt rounds ricocheted harmlessly from his plate. A missile struck his left pauldron and exploded. And Honsou simply shook off the fire and kept coming. His hammer rose. It fell. A column shattered, bringing the roof down in a cascade of rubble that crushed the defender's left flank. Sergeant Paulinus fired his last bolt pistol round into Honsou's chest. The Warsmith did not even flinch. With a roar, Honsou seized the sergeant by the throat and lifted him into the air. Paulinus clawed futilely at the iron grip. "Your honor is ashes," Honsou snarled. He snapped the loyalist's neck with a casual wrench and hurled the body into the burning ruin behind him. The remaining defenders broke and ran. Guilliman's Gate fell. Deep within the tomb, guarded by the last true sons of Ultramar on Calth, lay the sarcophagus of Remus Ventanus. Carved of white marble, veined with gold, it stood as a beacon of defiance and a target. Honsou approached it now, his retinue at his side. "Bring it down," he commanded. Grendel and the newborn moved forward, explosives already prepared. Yet before they could act, a new force struck. From the smoke and ruin emerged figures clad in the blue and gold of the Ultramarines. Uriel Ventress himself leading a handful of survivors. His armor was scarred, his blade nicked and blood-stained, but his eyes burned with undiminished fury. At his side marched a few others. Raven Guard scouts, Imperial fists, heavy gunners. A librarian whose psychic aura shimmered with wrath, barely contained. They hurled themselves into the Bloodborne like a blade into a wound. Ventress clashed with the newborn first. Brother against twisted reflection. Mirror against nightmare. The duel was savage. The newborn fought with skill and brutality, but Ventress fought with something more. Purpose, memory, rage sharpened to a killing edge. Blades met with the crack of thunder. Sparks and blood flew. Then, with a cry of defiance, Ventress plunged his sword through the newborn's chest, driving the clone to its knees. The newborn reached out, clawing at Ventress's gorget, trying to speak, but only blood came. He toppled backward, dead, a final testament to Honsou's failure to forge a perfect weapon. Honsou watched the clone die without expression. Then he stepped forward himself. Ventress met him head-on, knowing he faced a titan of brutality and hate incarnate. They clashed like gods of old, hammer against sword, steel against will. Every strike from Honsou shattered columns and buckled the floor. Every parry from Ventress was a miracle of speed and precision. Around them, the battle raged. Bloodborne fought loyalists in a maelstrom of fire and fury. Grendel smashed a Raven Guard into a column with his Warhammer. Varnes gunned down Imperial fists with clinical efficiency. Makar's laughter rolled like thunder as more demons spilled into reality. Still, Ventress fought on. Step by step, he forced Honsou back from the sarcophagus of Vendettas. But even as he gained ground, he realized the truth. This was never a duel for victory. It was a distraction. Behind Honsou, the explosives had been planted. The charges were already counting down. With a last brutal strike, Honsou hurled Ventress away, sending him crashing into a shattered plinth. The Warsmith turned away without another glance. "Let it burn," he growled. The explosives detonated. The tomb of Remus Ventanus was consumed in an inferno of fire and collapsing stone. The ground trembled. The sky tore open with warp light. The scream of dying spirits filled the air. And as the dust and fire billowed upward, Honsou strode from the ruin, victorious. Calth had been wounded once again, not by Horus, not by treachery, but by vengeance, by Honsou. Thus did the inferno on Calth blaze, and from its ashes the wars of the future were born. The fires of Calth burned low, but they burned still. Across the shattered cities, across the blackened fields and poisoned rivers, smoke drifted like mourning shrouds into the blood-red sky. Debris orbited the ruined planet. The wreckage of proud void ships, shattered defense stations, and broken satellites, spinning slowly in the silence of the void. Above it all, the Stoneheart floated like a wounded predator, bleeding atmosphere from fractured hull plates, but defiant, still alive. And within, Honsou brooded over the ashes of his victory. The Bloodborne feasted in the lower decks. The air stank of blood, oil, and demonic musk. They brawled, they roared, they carved new scars across their already ruined bodies to celebrate the fall of Calth. Banners, torn from the shrines of the Ultramarines, hung like grim trophies across the walls. Captives were dragged screaming into the gladiator pits. Demon engines prowled the corridors, still hungry, even after gorging themselves on the souls of the dead. It was a kingdom built not on loyalty, but on violence. And Honsou knew, kingdoms like this did not last. They were not meant to. In the ship's sanctum, beneath the shattered aquila of a captured Imperial warship, Honsou knelt alone before a great iron slab. Upon it were carved the names of worlds he had broken: Hydra Cordatus, Tarsis Ultra, Kalen Gol, Calth. The marks were deep, gouged into the iron with his own hand. There was space for more. So many more. He ran a scarred finger across the name Calth, tracing the letters as if memorizing every moment of its destruction. The fall of Guilliman's shrine world was not just a military victory. It was a wound carved into the myth of Ultramar itself, a scar that would never heal. "They will come," a voice rumbled behind him. Honsou did not turn. Grendel, blood-slick and breathing heavily from his latest negotiations with rebellious lieutenants, stood at the threshold. "The Imperium," Grendel said. "The Ultramarines, they will come for you. Guilliman will not suffer this insult." Honsou rose slowly. His armor creaked under the weight of his victories and the scars of 100 battles. "Let them," he said. "I am iron. I endure." Grendel bowed, a rough warrior's nod, and withdrew. In truth, Honsou knew the truth better than any of his followers. This was not the end of war. It was only the beginning. Far beyond the maelstrom, in the heart of Ultramar, astropaths screamed as visions of Calth's fall lashed their minds. In the fortress monastery of the Ultramarines, ancient bells tolled in mourning. Requiems were sung for the dead. Oaths were sworn to avenge the fallen. Guilliman himself, returned from death and duty-bound to the Imperium's salvation, turned his gaze briefly toward the scars of his realm, and he remembered the name whispered on dying lips. Honsou, a mongrel, a half-breed, a traitor, and now a legend in his own terrible right. Back aboard the Stoneheart, Honsou walked the observation deck. Outside the void shields, Calth spun in darkness, a wounded world still belching fire and smoke into orbit. Here and there, loyalist ships limped through the debris fields, scavenging survivors, broadcasting desperate cries for reinforcement. Honsou watched them with a detached curiosity. He could have destroyed them, could have annihilated every last scrap of resistance, but it was better this way. Let them crawl back to their masters. Let them tell the tale of what had been done. He wanted the Imperium to remember, to fear, to choke on the memory of their shame. There were mutterings within the Bloodborne. Some captains whispered of carving their own petty empires in the wake of Calth's fall. Others dreamed of betraying Honsou, taking his strength for themselves. It was inevitable. It was the way of chaos. Honsou welcomed it. He did not rule by loyalty. He ruled by inevitability. Those who stayed strong would survive beside him. Those who faltered would be ground into the dust beneath his iron heel. It was not cruelty. It was necessity. In the eye of terror, there is no peace, no unity, only war, only strength, only iron. Later, in the blackness of his private sanctum, Honsou carved a final mark into the iron plinth, a symbol, his symbol. Not the chained hammer of the old iron warriors, not the eightfold star of chaos undivided. A simple sigil, a broken sword bound with iron chains. The broken, reforged in hatred, the castaway made into a conqueror. It was not the symbol of a Primarch, it was the symbol of a survivor, of a warrior who had carved his own path through the blood and ruin of the galaxy. Somewhere far below, the Bloodborne feasted. Makar laughed in the warp, his appetite for chaos only sharpened by Calth's destruction. Across Ultramar, distress signals burned through the void, and Honsou, the half-breed, the outcast, the Warsmith of broken worlds, stood alone at the prow of the Stoneheart, staring into the infinite, cold reaches of space. Ahead of him lay more wars, more victories, more ruins to be heaped upon the ruins he had already made. He would not be remembered kindly. He would not be remembered as a hero, but he would be remembered. That was enough. Iron endures. Thus the legacy of iron was forged, not in honor, not in hope, but in fire, blood, and eternal war.